Good morning. I'm Evan Bloom. I'm a senior fellow at the Polar Institute of the Wilson Center. And on behalf of the Wilson Center, I'd like to welcome you today to a discussion about challenges facing marine conservation in the Southern Ocean. So we have a really great panel today with three of the most knowledgeable people and key leaders on this subject matter. As the former US Commissioner to the Commission for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources, referred to as Kamlar, I followed these issues closely, and I'm glad to be able to convene such a well-experienced group. We are going to focus our attention on actions taking place in Kamlar, which is the organization within the Antarctic Treaty System that focuses on fisheries management and marine protection in Antarctica. So why do we care about this topic? There are many reasons that we should. The Southern Ocean is a vast area of the planet. The Antarctic continent is in the middle, but the surrounding waters cover some 36 million square kilometers. The Southern Ocean has a tremendous amount of marine life, including fisheries that have been managed by Kamlar since the mid-1980s, but also lots of whales, seals, penguins, and loads of krill. It has been the focus of attention for creation of large-scale marine protected areas, such as the ones in the Ross Sea and near the South Orkney Islands. The Ross Sea MPA is the world's largest MPA. Many states and civil society groups are pushing to protect 30% of the world's ocean by 2030, the so-called 30 by 30 campaign. It's hard to imagine achieving that goal without establishment of further MPAs in the Southern Ocean. The worldwide interest in addressing climate change brings a great deal of attention to Antarctica. That is in part because of the science being undertaken there, and also because of the potential sea level rise that will come from melting Antarctic glaciers. Moreover, there is increasing attention being given to the Southern Ocean as a carbon sink. And of course, there's the continuing attention paid to environmental protection in an area of relatively pristine wilderness. So there are three main marine protected area proposals pending before the Commission, one in East Antarctica, one in the Weddell Sea, and one adjacent to the Antarctic Peninsula. Establishment of any MPAs requires the agreement by consensus of all 26 members of the Commission, and that's the tricky part. Since 2016, when the Ross Sea MPA was agreed, there's been no consensus for further MPAs. Indeed, implementation of the existing ones has proved difficult. And MPAs aren't the only issues within Kamlar. At this October's annual meeting, there was disagreement over compliance issues, as well as catch limits for toothfish, which are served as Chilean sea bass in US restaurants. Indeed, the US is the largest importer of seafood from Antarctica. So I'm glad we can talk with some real experts and seasoned diplomats who can help us understand what is going on in this aspect of Antarctic diplomacy. We have with us the chair of the Commission, Dr. Jacob Granit. He is Director General at the Swedish Agency for Marine and Water Management. And two colleagues with whom I've worked for many years, Jane Rumble, the UK Commissioner to Kamlar, as well as head of the UK delegation to the Antarctic Treaty Consultative Meetings. She is head of the Polar Regions Department in the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. And we have Dr. Joji Morishita. He is Japan's Commissioner to Kamlar and a professor at Tokyo University of Marine Science and Technology. He was Japan's Commissioner to the International Whaling Commission and has held senior positions with Japan's Fisheries Agency. Each of our panelists will be given the opportunity to speak for 5 minutes or so. Then we'll have a discussion among us. So please feel free to send questions to polar@wilsoncenter.org. That's polar@wilsoncenter.org. Those questions will be forwarded to me, and I'll in turn pose some of them to the panelists. We'll take just an hour for this entire program. I'd like to thank Program Assistant from the Polar Institute, Michaela Sith, for making the arrangements, and also our wonderful IT people who have put all of this together. So let's start with Director General Granite. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and I'd like to thank the Wilson Center, of course, and the Polar Institute for letting me speak and address the panel on Antarctic marine conservation, policy directions, and current challenges. As you heard, my name is Jacob Granit. I'm the Director General for the Swedish Agency for Marine and Water Management, and also the current chair of the Commission for the 2-year period 2020 to 2022. The chairmanship of Kamlar is rotating between its 26 members in alphabetical order, and Sweden took over from Spain in November 2020. And our chairmanship is based on the respect for the international rule-based order, grounded on international law, and for tackling, of course, global challenges collectively. Antarctica contains about 90% of the world's ice and around 70% of the planet's freshwater. And the annual cycle of sea ice growing and melting around Antarctica defines both the Earth's climate and the unique Antarctic ecosystem. And the Antarctic circumpolar current is the only ocean current that circumnavigates the Earth when it connects the Atlantic Ocean, the Indian Ocean, and the Pacific Ocean with the Southern Ocean. And the recent Glasgow Climate Change Conference in November 2021 highlighted the importance of oceans in the climate systems in general. So on the challenges side, what are some of them? Well, as you know, the marine life of the Southern Ocean has been harvested since 1790, when sealers first hunted seals for their pelts. And by 1825, some of these seal populations were close to extinction. And commercial whaling in the Southern Ocean began in 1904, and large-scale fishing for finfish began in the late 1960s. And then the krill fishing started in the mid-70s. And today, the fisheries in the convention area target primarily Patagonian toothfish, as we heard, Antarctic toothfish, mackerel, icefish, and of course, krill. Then the krill industry is very innovative in developing products from krill, such as health and nutrient supplements, aquaculture, and pet food for supplying growing markets. And now, evidence points towards the fact that the Southern Ocean current is getting stronger and faster due to climate change. So beyond these challenges related to historic exploitation of marine resources and climate change, what is voiced today as a critique towards the management of the Southern Ocean is that the pace in terms of establishing marine protected areas is slow and perhaps has stalled. And further concerns relate to, for example, the increasing number of tourists and invasive species related to increasing shipping in the Southern Ocean. So let me address these challenges by providing a very brief overview of the governance framework of the Southern Oceans before I conclude. The Antarctic Treaty System is a unique set of international legal instruments that has evolved over time. And a cornerstone is the Antarctic Treaty itself that was signed in December 1959, which stipulates in Article 1 that Antarctica shall only be used for peaceful purposes. Before and since the signing of the Antarctic Treaty, multiple associated agreements have been reached to build a governance and management regime in the Antarctic region that includes its marine ecosystems. The International Whaling Commission, for example, established in 1945, and the Convention for the Antarctic Seals in 1972. And in 1980, the Convention on the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources was adopted in Canberra in Australia. And its commission was established 2 years after. So this year, we celebrate 40 years of the existence of Kamlar. And then further, the Madrid Protocol of the Antarctic Treaty was signed in 1991, and it prohibits all activities related to Antarctic mineral resources, except for scientific research. So coming back to Kamlar, the objective of the Kamlar is the conservation of the Antarctic marine living resources. And this entails also rational use or sustainable use. And to address overfishing, as we heard before, the Convention had pioneered the concept of ecosystem-based management and developed the concept as we know it today. The ecosystem-based approach includes the different conservation measures agreed each year, consisting of a number of different area-based management approaches and other measures that are consistent with its Article 9. This includes defining management areas, sub-areas and divisions within the convention area, and setting catch limits by area for fisheries regulation, fisheries control in these areas, and also other area-based management tools, such as marine protected areas. The convention also lists other measures, such as the protection of vulnerable marine ecosystems, VMEs, the designation of regions or sub-regions for purposes of study or conservation, specially managed and specially protected areas. And it also has an ecosystem monitoring program. So Antarctic fisheries today is therefore understood to be managed from an ecosystem-based perspective, based on these different area-based measures. And if colleague Michaela could put up, I have an exhibit to highlight the discussion here. So as we heard, the management regime for the Southern Oceans is continuing to develop, and that is very important. And the statistical areas shown in the exhibit, these are the original Kamlar statistical areas for fishing purposes. And the process for establishing MPAs is outlined in the Kamlar Conservation Measure 9104, the general framework for the establishment of Kamlar marine protected areas. And as we heard from Bloom, the MPAs have been agreed to date in the Southern Oceans, 2 of them, the South Orkney Islands, Southern Shelf MPA, and Ross Sea MPA. And the blue fields on this map exhibit indicates the Ross Sea marine protected area and the South Orkney Islands, Southern Shelf MPA. The Ross Sea MPA came into force in 2017 following long and also very difficult negotiations, and it's very large, as we heard, covering 1.5 million square kilometers. Now, 3 more MPAs are proposed by many Kamlar members, and total area 3 million square kilometers. And you can see them here in different shades of green. The East Antarctica Marine Protected Area in dark green, the Antarctic Peninsula Protected Area, Domain 1 in light green, and finally, the Weddell Sea Marine Protected Area in very light green. If these 3 MPAs would be decided, they would cover an area of about 1.5% of the world ocean and 15% of the convention area. So, some concluding remarks. The Antarctic Treaty System, with its associated conventions and agreements, make up a comprehensive regional regime for the protection of the continent and the Southern Oceans as a global public good. And the Antarctic Treaty System, including Kamlar, is, I would argue, a prominent example of how areas with unresolved sovereignty issues can be jointly managed. However, shifting geopolitical interests related to fishing, tourism, navigation, research, and climate change are putting a new stress on the Antarctic Treaty System as a whole, and of course on Kamlar. It is becoming more difficult to agree in consensus. But Kamlar, from my point of view, is working, and this is demonstrated by the work by the Scientific Committee and the adoption annually of conservation measures addressing many aspects of an ecosystem-based management regime. But the process of establishing MPAs is not moving forward, and challenges related to the understanding of science necessary to support decisions on fishing opportunities are also emerging. Some members propose, for example, that the definition of MPAs need to be elaborated, that the scientific approach is better defined, and that frameworks for research and monitoring plans should be in place. Other members stress that the agreed conservation measure 9104 is the accepted framework for MPA establishment. Therefore, some members now reiterate that the current framework for establishing MPAs in the convention area does not provide a required unified approach. It could be concluded that members need to find a way to come out of this impasse and demonstrate that it's capable of continuing delivering effective management responses. So what could be the alternatives? Well, first of all, my assessment is that an approach is needed that is more inclusive and builds stronger ownership to the conservation agenda, including the rational, sustainable use of natural resources. And an agreement for a common process that respects the concerns of all members of the Commission needs to be developed. And such approach, most importantly, must be promoted at the highest political level. Secondly, a key stepping stone towards broader inclusion could be to reinforce the spatial planning approach that I referred to, and that to some degree already exists in the Convention in Article 9 and in the Antarctic Treaty System as a whole. Much has been learned about marine spatial planning, for example, through the UNESCO ISE process, and also today within the negotiations that are ongoing on the UNCLOS on biodiversity and national jurisdiction. A marine spatial planning process that is familiar to many members and is broader in the approach to marine protection compared to marine protection only could perhaps increase the interest from Kamlar members to find common solutions. It could consider fishing, a functional network of marine protected areas, tourism, science, and navigation in conjunction, and be based on an extensive stakeholder engagement. It could also be an opportunity to engage many interested parties outside the group of members directly concerned within Kamlar from a day-to-day perspective. And finally, at the recent October Kamlar 40 meeting, members, in addition to reaffirming their strong and unwavering cooperation and commitment to the objective of the convention, agreed that a special meeting on marine protection and marine spatial planning will be organized by the Commission. So in summary, by expanding the discourse on MPAs only to a broadened approach, perhaps designed around the marine spatial planning process, could be a way forward to tackle differences and find common solutions. And it could consider the spatial management elements in the ATS, the system as a whole, thereby taking advantage of the broader governance regime of the Antarctic region and southern oceans. So I would argue that building blocks for the future do exist within Kamlar, the ATS, the system as a whole, and other ocean governance practices that are under development by the global community. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed. That's a very helpful overview of many issues affecting Kamlar. So next, I'd like to turn the floor over to Jane Rumble for a UK perspective. Jane.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Evan and Jakob, for firstly having this event, and secondly to Jakob for outlining the Kamlar so eloquently. I thought, given that would be the case, I would focus very much on kind of where we've got to. So, as Jakob has mentioned, Kamlar is about to celebrate its 40th anniversary, and I would argue that over those 40 years, it's been pretty successful. Notwithstanding the challenges it's currently facing, but over those 40 years, it's largely achieved its objective of the conservation of the Southern Ocean. Notably, there is no long-term obvious decline of any fish stocks, and in fact, some of the stocks that were looking to be in decline have been managed now by Kamlar, and some of them are in recovery. For example, the marble rock cod would be an example. Also, Kamlar has very successfully enhanced fishing practices, particularly to reduce bycatch. As Jakob has said, it takes an ecosystem approach. So it doesn't just focus on whether or not the fish stocks are long-term sustainable, but also what's eating the fish and what's eating the thing that's eating the fish, and are they all right as well? So particularly the fishing practices that have been brought in to reduce seabird bycatch have been phenomenal. We've gone from a scenario where many thousands of seabirds were being killed through fishing activity in the Southern Ocean to very, very low numbers now, particularly some of the rarer albatrosses. Also, there was a big issue with illegal fishing around the Southern Ocean, and that's largely been driven out. And I would argue that partly the having legal fishing operators around the Southern Ocean has helped with that, because you've got more eyes on the water. You've also got more regulation of those vessels. Those vessels are obliged to report back when they sight other vessels. So it has driven out what was quite a bad, quite a serious organized illegal fishing ground, to the point now where we have not too much illegal fishing, thankfully, but we can't get complacent about that. But also the fishing catch has been well regulated through market measures. So there is a requirement that every piece of toothfish that you have on your plate should come with a certificate to tell you who caught it, where they caught it, when they caught it, where it's been imported to, where it's got to. So you have a real sort of chain of custody, which Kamlar's put in place. So that's really helped to protect those stocks. Kamlar's also pioneered, actually, in many sense, the management of the marine environment. It's done that through protection of vulnerable marine ecosystems, which is a fancy way of saying important bits of the seabed that could be destroyed by bad fishing practices. So all of those are protected. Bottom trawling, which is where you drag your heavy fishing gear along the bottom of the ocean, is prohibited from most of the Southern Ocean. And there have been significant agreements, as have been mentioned. There have been 2 marine protected areas agreed, so I'll come back to where we're at with that. But those were the first real agreements internationally for large areas of the marine environment to be set aside from fishing. And we also have an agreement within Kamlar to give protection to areas that are newly exposed from glacial ice retreat. And for those of you who are interested in Southern Ocean science, you will have recently seen some amazing footage of ice fish nests across vast swathes of the Southern Ocean under the ice. So we know that what lives under the ice is vulnerable to bad fishing activity. So protecting those areas when the ice retreats is very important. And also we've massively improved our scientific understanding of the Southern Ocean through the enhanced scientific requirements that Kamlar has imposed. So on our 40th anniversary, there are reasons to be cheerful. However, it is pretty clear that there are also reasons to make us sit up and pay attention. And it is true to say, I think, that the views of the Kamlar membership are becoming increasingly polarized. And I think one of the challenges that is causing that polarization is becoming an increasing challenge between protection and rational use, i.e. fishing. So the objective of the convention is conservation, but conservation means that you don't do anything to the environment that would stop it recovering within several decades. Whereas protection is more understood to be the protection of every single organism. So no bycatch of anything, no potentially environmental impact. And so in the view of the UK, of course, these things need to be taken hand in hand. We are a conservation nation. We are supportive of marine protection. We are also a fishing nation. So we do believe that the things need to go in hand. But I think increasingly there's this tension, because the way that we look at Antarctica is kind of interesting. As Jakob has mentioned, the history, the first agreements that the Antarctic Treaty really made spoke much more to using Antarctica. So it was about managing seal harvesting. Now then Kamlar came along managing fishing harvesting. Then the world really kind of changed in the late 1980s. So the environmental protocol that Jakob mentioned is much more protectionist. So that preserves Antarctica as a place of peace and science, and its protection levels are much, much higher than those in Kamlar, which is talking about conservation. So there is a slight difference in the way that we manage tourism, for example, which must accord to the protection levels of the environmental protocol, and the way we manage fishing, which is meeting a bar of conservation. So there are many members that feel that we should move towards more protection, including within Kamlar, but there are other members who are frustrated that they see this tidal wave of protection as basically a mechanism to drive out any kind of rational use and fishing activity. And we've seen these tensions kind of come together, not just in relation to marine protected area agreements, but also, as Evan mentioned, there are challenges now on whether or not there will be catch limits. If you don't agree a catch limit, then arguably you have no limits. So if you dismantle some of the regulations that Kamlar's put in place over the last 40 years, then you could be pursuing an objective of increasing fishing activity around the Southern Ocean. And this all also comes together quite crucially at the moment. We're trying to agree within Kamlar a framework for the management of krill. When Kamlar was first adopted, there was this sort of perception that there was loads of krill and it was all right, and we should just go and catch a lot because, you know, if you weighed all of the krill on the planet, put it all together and weighed it, it would weigh more than if you put together all the humans on the planet. So there is a lot of krill, that's not under argument. However, if you catch all the krill from right next to a penguin colony, then those penguins aren't going to do too well. So if you're going to catch krill, it needs to be distributed and it needs to be managed carefully. But doing that in a backdrop of uncertainty over climate change and increasing whale populations, which is a good thing, but means that they also want to go and get the krill, you need to come up with a way to ensure that you're delivering the conservation, which, you know, in our view means you need to balance protection and use. So the Commission has got a real challenge, I think, in terms of where it goes. But in my view, this is sort of fundamentally driven by this tension between protection and use, on which we need to find a reasonable balance. So in an ideal world, what I would like Kamlar to be focusing on is that, we continue to enhance our understanding, because if we improve the scientific understanding, we'll get a better idea of where the most vulnerable areas are, where are the other fish nests, where are the spawning grounds, where are the vulnerable parts of the ocean that really must be protected against all costs. We know that the Southern Ocean is critical to the health of the whole ocean, so we need to look after the Southern Ocean. If we could do that, we could be much more confident in our ability to assess the stocks, and we need to have a more sort of guaranteed way of making that judgment, so that businesses can invest in their operations, so that they can get better fishing vessels that are safer, cleaner, greener. They need some certainty, so we need to be able to be assured that if the science is in place, then there will be some opportunity for fishing activity, because arguably that also helps us manage the Southern Ocean. And we also need to make sure that we keep this well-regulated fishery to drive out IUU. So should that be possible to do that, then I think it is possible that Kamlar will be able to continue to deliver its objective of conservation, whilst also protecting the environment and potentially increasing fishing opportunities in a long-term and sustainable way. So kind of whichever way it goes next, as I say, the future of the Southern Ocean is absolutely critical to all of us. So it's great that you've all tuned in to engage in this debate. We are very keen to get a wider diversity of people engaging in this debate, because these challenges around Antarctica need the talents of everyone. So shout out to all the junior scientists and early career scientists that might be tuning in. Do engage in this debate, because we need you. Thank you very much.
Jane, thank you very much indeed. You've pointed us to the many successes of Kamlar, and there's, as you say, a long list of those, but a number of challenges which those in the Commission are trying to deal with now. So next, I'd like to turn to Joji Marishita in Tokyo. Joji, floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Evan. And I'd like to thank the Wilson Center and Evan especially for organizing this very important panel, especially at the timing that Kamlar itself is facing its crucial time. And I'd like to also thank the chair, Jacob and Jane, for providing a very good background, as well as a past achievement of this organization, important organization in Antarctic. And I all agree with your assessment and presentations. And I'd like to, as a third and last speaker, I'd like to focus on some of the challenges or tensions that Jane just raised. And maybe Jacob presented the general whole picture of a situation surrounding Antarctic and Kamlar, and Jane focused on the past achievement and good thing about Kamlar, and a few about changes, I mean the challenges. Maybe I should focus on the future of this organization and some of my idea how actually we can make this organization better, and also stimulate some good questions from the audience. It is not unique for Kamlar to have tension or challenges. And as Jane explained, that tension or challenge or polarization is between the idea of a protection and the use or development of resources in the Antarctic. This structure or this tension or this picture is not just unique to Antarctic situation or Kamlar. We see similar tensions in many different places. Maybe even the climate change discussion in Glasgow could be characterized in a similar picture of a tension between protection and the development of industry or economy in some countries. And I feel some concerns that sometimes this tension is also increasing the political tension among the members involved in the discussion. And oftentimes, those who are involved are trying to resolve the situation by posing more political pressures to others or to increase the political feature of among the discussion concerning particular issues like MPA in Kamlar. Kamlar is an organization like a whole Antarctic Treaty System organization for consensus building. And the consensus building is sometimes tedious and difficult and requires a lot of effort. And even it is pointed out that the consensus system actually does not work. And we should get rid of this system to be replaced by some voting system because we can make some decision. And political pressure or political numbers game might be going for this direction. But we all know that sometimes imposing one way of approaching particular issue to the others oftentimes reduce the effectiveness of the final products. And also, we know that sometimes who are defeated or on the minor voting side will not actually cooperate with whatever the decision that is made. And overall, if as a Kamlar is aiming for the conservation of marine environment, marine ecosystem, marine resources of Antarctic, the final goal or final purpose of whatever we'll be doing is to have effective system for both conservation, for protection, for actually sustainable use or rational use of our resources, rather than the system which might look like very effective or which might look like very strong, actually only creates more tensions or other inconsistencies or the ineffective management of a system itself. So I myself still supports or continue to support consensus building, even if we spend a long time for particular difficult issues. And Evan played a very important role in building the consensus around the establishment of a Ross Sea MPA. It took some time, 5 years or 6 years. However, we achieved the consensus over the world's largest MPA. But in doing this, there are a lot of more detailed discussion and sharing the interest and sharing the benefits out of the establishment of MPAs. Oftentimes, especially from outside, those difficult issues or contentious issues are portrayed as a very simplistic way. Either you protect the environment or not. Either you introduce MPA or not. MPA as a very simple system of no-take zone for the all wide area for a long time or almost indefinitely. But we all know, as a participant of Ross Sea MPA, the Ross Sea MPA is much more sophisticated, well science-based management system. It has a no-take zone. It has a zone dedicated for the research. And also it took care of fisheries that could be influenced by the introduction of a Ross Sea. Why can't we do this again for other freestanding MPA proposals, or maybe others? And if we continue to keep this polarization or tension, we are already seeing that tension or polarization is affecting the other important issues of a Kamlar agenda, as Jane explained very well. some of the research activities, the catch quota issue, compliance evaluation issue, and also important issue of how we actually address climate change issue. All those things are affected by the general tension or atmosphere of Kamlar. And as we are approaching, we are celebrating the 40th anniversary of this organization. I think this is a chance for us to change the paradigm of a negotiation so that we shift the gear toward consensus building. But what is important is all the players have to express their willingness to be engaged in the discussions or negotiations, rather than saying, this is our proposal, accept or not, or take or leave it type of approach will not make any progress for us. And what we have to discuss is then we already spent a long time. What can we do to build consensus? What can we do to find a place where all of us are equally satisfied and maybe equally unsatisfied, but much better outcome of making progress in conservation of marine living resources and ecosystem and utilization, rather than very divided continuation of a political discussion. And Japan, as you may know, has been sort of standing in the middle as long as MPA discussion has been concerned. We are supporting the establishment of science-based MPAs like ROSI MPA. And at the same time, we didn't join the co-sponsors of a three-standing MPA proposal with reasons. And as to the support of ROSI MPA, we see the effectiveness and the importance of area-based management and conservation measures. When it is built rightly, especially in accordance with the conservation measure 91.4, which we support full-heartedly, we can show to the world that well-designed MPA really can do the job, and all stakeholders can support that job. The reason we didn't join the co-sponsorship of a three-standing MPAs is, unfortunately, the situation becomes like if we join the co-sponsorship, that is seen as we support the proposal almost without any reservation, or just supporting the proposal 100%, or we are engaged in black and white type of approach as long as MPA is concerned. We believe the power of a negotiation and consultation and dialogue. And the Japan thought that joining once as a sponsorship or one of the sponsorship countries to the standing proposal might be inconsistent with that approach. Of course, we are not opposing. We are willing to discuss exact contents of MPA proposals, but that's not happening, unfortunately. There are many unanswered questions. And we ask the question, but oftentimes the discussion itself just become more simplistic as we like this, or we don't like this, or support a proposal or not. Hopefully, during the discussion following our presentation, also I can talk about some of the ideas or details to make the progress in the discussion of MPAs. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
So thank you very much indeed. I really appreciate that each in these excellent presentations, you've gone off in different areas related to the fundamental issues at Kamlar, and it's all very, very helpful. And Georgie, I really appreciate your focusing on the question of the role of consensus, which, as you say, is a hallmark of the Antarctic Treaty System, and managing Antarctica and Antarctic diplomacy through consensus takes a huge amount of effort, and there can be a lot of frustration, but there's also been a lot of success as well. So first of all, I'd like to say that we're still accepting questions by email. So if you have a question for the panelists, please send it to polar@wilsoncenter.org. So I hope we can talk a little bit about the MPA issue, which is very important to many stakeholders. But first, let me just go back to Kamlar in general and how it's functioning. Kamlar has generally considered to be one of the best science-based bodies managing fisheries, and each of you have touched on this a bit, and Jane in particular, but I'd like to get more of a sense of how you think Kamlar is doing. Does it deserve its positive reputation, and how can it go forward as an organization to meet many difficult challenges? So I thought I'd start with Dr. Granite and see if you have any thoughts about that.
Thank you so much, and also thanks for those interventions from both the UK and Japan. And as the chair of the organization, I'm sort of listening very carefully to my colleagues to see their perspectives, because the role of the chair is essentially to listen to all perspectives and ensure that we have a forum for dialogue. And as we heard, consensus building, which is really the idea, the concept that is driving these relationships that have been built over so long time. So, you know, the issue was regarding fishing, and I think that Jane, I would argue, confirmed that as well, that the history, the evolution of these management practices, the measures that have come about, really demonstrates that it's possible to manage such a large area, even though under a lot of uncertainty. So, you know, issues like the concepts like the precautionary principle, as I understand it, has been addressed in Kamlar when quotas has been set. Issues regarding better understanding of how the ecosystem works has also been part of the agenda setting for allowing fishing to take place. But of course, a lot of, as I understand it from having read the history on this, I'm not as deeply haven't been engaged in Antarctic issues like my colleagues have been for many, many years, but understanding how this, the evolution of this is really trying to bring forward the science for better management decisions. But we know also that overfishing is still an issue globally. I am the responsible agency head of an institution that is working, implementing the EU Common Fisheries Policy, and in a national context then. And we, of course, have major challenges where I work in the Baltic Sea, which is a much smaller subsystem, where we have problem of overfishing of the herring, for example, the cod, another example. And because simply our science is not good enough, and it hasn't perhaps translated into the correct management decisions. So this is something we are struggling with, not only in the Antarctic region in the southern oceans, but also here in the western part of the world, in northern Europe, where I work. So I think the good, what we see here from Kamlar is this, having really spearheaded this concept of bringing in the importance of science for decision making is very, very important. And I think I would agree here with what my colleagues say. We need to continue investing in that. We need to continue investing more science, more data for improving our management decisions. And as this ecosystem evolves very rapidly, it is dynamic. I mean, the rebounds of the whaling populations, the whale populations and so forth, fantastic, tremendous signs that the system can recover. But also these whales, like the seals in the Baltic Sea, also predate on the same fish stocks that we as fishermen or the fishermen are also addressing. So the same dialogue or the same problem here on how to manage and how to use is really coming up in the Baltic or in other parts of the world, as well as in the Antarctic region. So I would say and that's partly why I also went back to the history a bit. I think there's ample evidence that an institution like this can work, that we can collectively gather evidence and knowledge for better decision making. But I also still think that it's important that we find a way to come out of this sort of impasse on the one hand that relates to MPAs. And just to repeat very briefly what I said, I think there's a lot of scope for finding a forum for that dialogue. And the Commission wants to do it, and we are currently working on that. And I think there are many good examples here of how we can find that safe space for continuing addressing the protection part of the use part. So in short, I think it's been fascinating results, and but the very, very important to keep up this dialogue and ensure that there is some progress on the topic of the MPAs, and also in that regard bring in other stakeholders. And I really support Jane's remark here on, please, those that are interested in this, learn more, engage. This is so important that we have more people engaged in this fascinating region. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. So I want to drill down a bit on the MPA issue in a moment, but first, just in terms of Kamlar's operation in general and how successful it's operating. Joji, would you like to add anything about Japan's satisfaction with, or lack thereof, with how Kamlar is working?
Yes, maybe also I should touch upon the issue of science, because it's a very important part of function of Kamlar. And the scientific committee or scientific community of Kamlar has achieved a lot. And that's one of the strongest point of this organization. And the science needs to be oftentimes be independent from political maneuver or emotions, those things. And the Kamlar Scientific Committee is doing a very good job, actually. Sometimes they are too independent, but they are actually responding the scientific needs of organization, and also always at the front line of a science of Antarctic environment. I also like to point out that the scientific situation surrounding the Antarctic environment and the living resources is very complex. And the science is a very sophisticated and complex stuff. But oftentimes, in the political discussions, they are too simplified. And the scientific community or Kamlar maybe as a whole has some responsibility to continue to disseminate a good information and the total scope of our discussion that is subject to the interests of people surrounding or interested in the Kamlar. Also, the scientific activities are not a numbers game again. And you cannot decide the scientific outcome by voting, and shouldn't be. Always a minor opinion or different opinion or strange opinion needs to be respected. And I think in terms of that, the Kamlar Scientific Committee is doing a very healthy job. Sometimes it's difficult. Also, we need to keep in our mind that science will not give you a definite answer. Science will give us some policy options and also range of uncertainties, and which is, again, very healthy. In that sense, I should say that scientific parts of Kamlar is working very well. And I do appreciate all the scientists involved in that work in Kamlar. And as to the Commission, the general sense of a cooperation and dialogue is there. And we all appreciate and respect the input from our scientific committee as well as all other subsidiary bodies of Kamlar family. However, we see some challenges. And the issue is, I guess, how we actually strengthen the good heritage of this organization, where we have been building consensus and actually doing some good job of promoting both conservation and sustainable use. So generally, I do appreciate the Kamlar work and Kamlar function in terms of its governance and systems. And we are always willing to look at the performance. We have been going through the performance review, and also scientific committee is now planning a scientific committee symposium, which is also good. So the Kamlar has its own custom of looking itself and try to improve its working. And I think this is also a good thing about this organization. So all the necessary tools and the components are there to improve or to change the situation of this organization, like all other speakers of this panel just emphasized. And the point is how we actually focus on these good things and use them to make the situation better. And we should be able to do this, but we have to change the approach that we might be sort of bogged down in the past few meetings. Thank you.
Georgie, thank you very much indeed. And I thank you very much for focusing in particular on the question of science within Kamlar, which I think many of us have always thought was the key bright spot and driver of policy within that organization. And so that's a very important point. Jane, I still want to get back to the MPA issues, and we only have 7 minutes or so left, but I wanted to give you a chance, if you had any thoughts you wanted to present on the difficulty in one of the statistical sub areas. There was a difference of a view between Russia and other members of the Commission, resulting in no catch limit being agreed. This seemed to be quite different from the normal way of reaching agreement on catch limits within the Commission. Is that a harbinger of more difficulties within Kamlar negotiations? What did you think about that situation?
Yes, thank you, and thank you for my colleagues picking up on the science, because I would also kind of start there. Really, I would firstly echo the thanks to all of our science colleagues who actually do the grunt work of Kamlar and meet a lot during the year and feed the information to the policy makers. And I think I would agree also with Jogie's comment about how important it is for that scientific debate to be fluid, and that if there is a minority view, then it should be respected. I suppose, kind of building on that, however, I would say that I would like to see Kamlar become more open and transparent, because we are seeing increasingly that it's not just scientists who are attending some of these scientist working groups, and some of the minority views aren't necessarily science views, they are kind of policy beliefs. So, if you have a bunch of scientists and one of them says, I believe the world to be flat, that's fine. However, that is open to challenge, and that should be challenged, and others should be able to give evidence to try to work out whether or not that's in fact a reasonable position to take. And so my kind of concern, and one of the concerns that led to the impasse that we had this year, is that there is a view that has been taken that is not being built on. It's a stated position that's now quite a number of years old, and it hasn't moved on. There hasn't been any further scientific analysis. There hasn't been any engagement. There hasn't been any challenge. The papers haven't been made public. There's been no peer review. So yes, I do worry that this may be a slippery slope for not allowing Kamlar to be a little bit more predictable. As I was saying in my opening remarks, it's not, Kamlar involves many players. So it's also the responsibility of fishermen to ensure that there's a long-term sustainable approach. We also have a very healthy non-governmental interest in Kamlar, and all of these voices kind of need to come together. It's not just one approach, but equally they need to be engaged. And consensus building, as Jodie said, is so important, but consensus building is not coming to an annual meeting and saying no. Consensus building is hard work, it's active, it requires long-term ongoing dialogue. You actually have to want to come to an agreement, not just to say, this is it. Either it'll be, the example of just putting an MPA on the table saying, take it or leave it, or basically saying, actually, I don't fish in this region, so why should I care? I'm not going to agree to there being any fishing. That either of these things are becoming potentially toxic. So, yes, I do hope that this is something that we can reverse and get back to a little bit more predictability, because we want people to invest. If we just don't want fishermen to just think, this is a one-year wonder, because they won't get the best, most efficient vessels. We want long-term investment. We want commitment. A fisherman that is engaged in the management of the fishery is in it for the long-term sustainability. It's no good to a fisherman if you fish out the entire stock in 1 year, because what do they eat the following year? So engaging all of the stakeholders and trying to be much more open and transparent, so these views can be expressed, that's completely acceptable and quite right, but they also need to be challenged and worked on in order to come to a consensus. And that's, Kamlar relies on that, and that's one of the challenges I think we've had with the pandemic, that it's been more difficult for us to meet in person, and it's been more difficult to hammer some of these issues out. So yeah, the sooner that we can maybe get back to in-person meetings, I think the better for the future of the organization. Thank you.
All right, well, first, we're nearly at our hour point, but I'm told by others that we can go on a little bit. With the consent of the panel, since this is very interesting and we're getting a lot of questions being sent in, can we go a little bit longer? If I see heads nodding, then I will do that, but I'll try not to abuse that privilege. But Jane, I want to just come back to the question of 48.3 and the negotiation around that. Is there anything you care to observe about what happened at the last commission session on that issue?
Well, I was kind of alluding to that in my last answer. I'm not sure what else to say really, other than this issue is very live, so we will be actively working on it. Thanks. Okay, understood. So I want to get into the MPA issue a little bit more and give you all the chance to talk about where we are on moving forward with the set of marine protected areas. We've touched on that a little bit already, but what needs to be done in order to move those issues forward? It's probably the issue that is what Kamlar is most well known for internationally, and what the international community is looking to Kamlar to move forward on. So there are a couple of countries that are not yet ready to move forward, it seems. So what should be done at this stage? Jodie.
Thank you. As to the MPA, my observation is proponents always says rightly that there have been a lot of efforts in designing the proposal, and all the best science available is included in the designing, and the scientific committee says that in its report. But those who are reluctant or opposing to the proposal, some of them says that they need more data, this data, or some baseline data, or different steps to follow. I'm not supporting the provision of 100% perfect data in order to build a proposal, or in order to require a perfect data for the proposal to be adopted. Because like we have just discussed, there are always uncertainties, and the marine ecosystem is a very dynamic thing. And the lack of some minor data or even the major data should not be the item to prevent for us to take some action. However, at the same time, we need probably, in order to build consensus, we should have a pretty good amount of common understanding about what actually will happen if we introduce particular MPAs. What will happen to, or what activities will be restricted to what extent, or what will happen to the existing research and fisheries activities in the area subject of a proposal. What will happen if new research needs or new interest in use of a resource happens in that area of MPA. At this stage, we have some kind of answer, like those situations will be handled in accordance with existing conservation and management measures. That's a good answer, but at the same time, maybe for some people, it's not specific enough. My sense is there are many questions that needs to be answered. And in the past Kamlar meetings, somehow the exchange is mainly about each positions rather than trying to answer the question about the others, which is preventing consensus building. Do we have enough specific answers to some of the questions raised by those skeptics about the proposals? I think there are a lot of rooms for actual exchange of question and answers. I think availability of the best available science might mean a different thing in the mind of the people who are engaged in this discussion. Then we need to build some common sense or common understanding if there are differences, rather than stick to the point that we have a best one or we don't have a perfect information. Maybe we should talk about a little bit more specific as to the particular point of our proposals. But generally speaking, I think there are many answers that needs to be actually, there are many questions that needs to be answered rather than just exchanging the positions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Other colleagues, thoughts on the MPA impasse? Jacob, to you, please.
Thanks. Well, I think my observation as the chair has been engaged now for 1.5 years or so is that when you come to a situation like this, you have made up your mind and invested a lot in a certain way of working. For example, just preparing all the documentation that are necessary for these MPAs. Then you're very committed to ensure that they're happening, which is absolutely understandable. And then there are other members that are of the view that there's not enough evidence. Then, and this has been going on, as we know now, for a couple of years. Then at that point, you really need to come together and see what other ways do we have to address this issue. And I think, from the point of view of chairing a number of the meetings, there was an agreement in the Kamlar 40 meeting in November to actually have a dialogue amongst members on a special meeting on marine planning, spatial planning, and the MPAs. And to me, and also this is where I would like to bring in some other work that we've been doing globally, and I think where Kamlar perhaps could also learn, because much has been learned from Kamlar. It is in the marine spatial planning process where there is fora for really addressing the different uses and conservation needs of the ocean space. So it's navigation, it's tourism, it's fishing, it's conservation practices. And I think to broaden the scope in this dialogue that the Commission members are embarking upon would be beneficial to increase the understanding of what tools we have available in conserving and utilizing the ocean space, but also the region as a whole. And I think they would be very beneficial for members in the Antarctic Treaty and the other system components to engage more with the Kamlar members to look upon this region as a whole and really address what type of different spatial management measures do we have. And there are a number of them, and some of them were shown on the exhibit that I demonstrated. It's the ASPAs on the coastal zone, it's the research areas, it's tourist areas, and so forth. That bigger comprehensive picture, as I understand, is not yet built within the treaty system. So I think that is a way to broaden the discourse, but of course maintaining the value of everything that's been pulled forward in these specific MPAs, but putting them in a broader context and understanding how we could utilize this space. And this is where I think the marine spatial planning agenda is going in Europe. As evidence, I think we have 26 members are working on that in their home countries. So there's a lot of experience in that. And then to ensure that there is a political engagement in that process would be absolutely necessary. So these are some of the issues I think that I hope that the members of the Commission will explore now when we meet rather soon in February in House of Delegation meetings, and preparing for such a dialogue, so that we open it up and come back on track and really explore the different avenues here, but in a broader framework. So that would be some of these ideas on taking this forward, because if there is no consensus making these three proposals, they're not going to move forward, and there would be a lot of disappointment again. And that's also a concern I have. And I think it is important to not get stuck on these MPAs as such, but really enforce what good has been achieved and carve out that process that would bring members and others to the table again. Over.
Thank you very much. And of course, it's not just the MPAs themselves, but the implementation of, it's not just new MPAs, it's the implementation of the existing MPAs, including the research and monitoring plan for the Ross Sea, et cetera, that are in play at the moment. So Jane, any further thoughts on this?
Yes, thank you. Well, firstly, I think I pretty much agree with everything that Joji and Jakob have said. I think from our perspective, we particularly agree with the point that Joji was making about the need for pragmatism and negotiation. So we took a slightly different view in the UK. I mean, we were key proponents originally of East Antarctica and the Weddell Sea when we were in the European Union, and obviously when we stopped being in the European Union, we had a choice to make. But we took the view that we would be co-sponsors, and as an indicator that we wanted to get these things kind of developed and implemented in Kamlar, because we do believe that marine protection is necessary to ensure future health of the ocean. I think there's pretty good evidence from elsewhere that a mixture of fishing and protection is a good long-term sustainable pathway. However, we did also want to signal very clearly that we are not in the business of saying these are the most perfect final versions of an agreement, take it or leave it, try to indicate that we did want to see negotiation. And I think sometimes we talk in very much generalities, and I think that the MPA debate has become a very general debate, and we sort of lose sight of the complexities of the differences of Antarctica. It's absolutely vast, and different bits of it are at different kind of levels of understanding and subject to different forces and so on. So, you know, the first MPA that Kamlar addressed was in the South Orkney Island, was a UK proposal. It was a kind of smallish area to demonstrate that marine protection could be a useful thing to do. So we picked an area that was pretty interesting. It's where lots of currents coincide as a sort of sentinel area of ocean to monitor for future climate change and future current changes and so on. But it was a relatively modest size MPA. I mean, it's still like 4 times the size of Wales. So, you know, living on the UK, that's pretty big. But in Southern Ocean terms, it's pretty small. Then we move forward to the Ross Sea, but the Ross Sea already had a pretty well developed exploratory fishery. So there was already an allowable catch for toothfish of, you know, one of the largest catches, which is managed by Kamlar. That was already in place. So delivering the marine protection was important because we needed to be sure that this fishery wasn't concentrating in particularly vulnerable areas. It wasn't fishing on the spawning stocks. It was moved out. So the agreement for the Ross Sea was to have the marine protected area defined by the scientists, and then the rest of the Ross Sea is open to fishing activity. So this balanced out, you know, some of these interests that we've been talking about between the protection and the use. When you look at the Weddell Sea and the East Antarctic, those circumstances don't apply. So there is a feeling from some members that we're just obsessing about these marine protected areas, and we're not really doing very much to develop the broader fishery. These areas have very small exploratory fisheries, but they're fished by research proposals because they haven't yet moved towards a stock assessment. So there's no development in a fisheries management, and now there's this obsession on protection. So some countries quite rightly ask, well, what is it you're protecting this area from? Because there isn't any fishing anyway. The Weddell Sea is a closed area. So what's the rush? Conversely, however, you would say, well, the rush is that the Southern Ocean is changing, the climate's changing, we're getting a warmer ocean in Antarctica, which is affecting the movement of species, and we have very vulnerable and obvious areas like the example I gave you of the 240 square kilometers of ice, million square kilometers of ice fish nests, I think it was, is a absolute ripe candidate for protection. You know, I would protect it tomorrow if it was left to me. But does that mean that justifies the whole of the Weddell Sea proposal? You know, in our view, it probably does, because we know that this is a vulnerable area and we think that there needs to be a good level of protection, but that case needs to be made. And I think the sort of the looking at the region by region approach and what the different drivers are and what the different arrangements are is probably needed, so that we don't get into this hypothetical debate about MPAs, which is currently where we are, which then just gets into the high level issues rather than drilling down. And the same with the Antarctic Peninsula is really crying out for further enhanced measures to ensure, as I mentioned, that we don't take the krill catch off the coast of a single penguin colony. It's actually at the moment the krill industry have got together and determined that they won't fish in such vulnerable areas. And Kamlar is lagging slightly behind in that we haven't actually agreed that formally. So it's a good example of industry taking responsibility. But also Kamlar needs to step up. But a one-size-fits-all is not going to work. So, yeah, I think getting into the granularity and maybe taking these things in chunks might move forward. But certainly we need to be pragmatic, and all sides need to compromise. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate all of your indulgence in continuing here. We should end shortly, but we do now have a lot of questions being posed, and one that I think relates a little bit to Jane's point about taking things in chunks. We have Phil Trathan from the British Antarctic Survey, who is asking, should MPA proposals be focused on smaller areas where supporting data are already available? Where supporting data are not available or are sparse, should the areas only become candidate MPAs in the future when data are improved. Such areas could receive provisional protection that becomes stronger as data improve, for example, as part of a research and monitoring plan. So would any of you be interested in responding to that? Let's see. Joji put his hand up first.
Okay. Maybe Jane might have a difficult time to answer the question from within her delegation. And I would say that Phil has some point in talking about small area and the area of more accumulated data. That might make a discussion a little bit more focused and maybe scientific and logical. At the same time, and also I do agree with the point, last point raised by Jane, that we need to look at the situation case by case and the region specific situation. And there's no one size fits all situation for MPA proposals. Having said that, related to my previous point, the question is what degree of information or data is enough for all of us to be satisfied with the proposal and support the proposals? Actually, there is no answer, I think about this. Because like we said, there are no perfect information. There are uncertainties. But the discussion is taking place like how much data we need in supporting the proposals. But actual situations that should be happening is MPA has a lot of different steps. Designing the MPA and in the form of a proposals and adopting the proposal, then you need to build the monitoring and management plan. And you review the situation. So you need some indicator species or indicator scientific data. And you go back to maybe at the beginning point of redesigning the MPAs. At each different level, each different steps, you need data. But oftentimes the discussion is taking place, some of the members are requesting, you need all the data at the beginning till the end of MPA. And you need to know everything about the baseline. You need to know everything that what might be happening in the future. You need to know everything about the indicator species or indicator parameters. That's difficult or almost impossible sometimes. But if can we agree that MPA is actually a combination of different steps, and at each point you require different data, then is it easier for us to have more certainty about the life of MPA we are looking at and considering? I might sound a little bit different going straight from Phil's questions, but the size or amount of data, I don't think is a definite deciding point of whether you accept MPA or not, or to make the discussion easier. It's more of we have a common understanding about the steps and also a degree of data at each steps. And if we have enough common understanding that larger area is needed and appropriate, that should be okay. So sometimes if someone thinks that if a proposal handles a smaller area, is it easier for all of us to accept? Maybe, but is this scientifically correct? Justified? If we find a large area like recent ice fish situation of a spawning, then that might justify a large area to be protected. So size and amount of data is important, maybe, but not the definite factor that will decide life or possibility of adapting MPA. That's how I see it.
Thank you. So I have some other questions. Does anybody else want to weigh in on that particular point? If not, I have a question from another Kamlar scientist, so we can continue with that pattern, from Stefan Hain of the German delegation and the Alfred Wegener Institute. As tension and discord increasingly affect the objectiveness of science and scientific discussions under Kamlar, what can we do to prevent a political polarization of science? Jane has already mentioned the type of people who come and occasionally make interventions in the scientific committee. That's one aspect of that issue, of course. But further thoughts on politicization of science within Kamlar? Jane.
Thank you very much, and hello to Phil and to Stefan, and congratulations, Stefan, on the ice fish discovery, which I think is the most exciting Kamlar news that we've had so far in 2022. Yes, I think the politicization, I've already kind of mentioned it. I do think it's a challenge. I think one of the things, as I mentioned, I would like to see is more openness and transparency, because I think it's more difficult to hold a position that cannot be scientifically justified in an open scientific arena than it is to express it in a closed meeting where you are only being challenged and you can view that challenge as being political. So yes, I think more openness from the science perspective and more engagement would help with that. But also the Commission needs to also give the scientists more feedback and give them more certainty, in that you don't always get a perfect answer from science, but the scientific processes do give the parameters in which decision making should be made. And the scientists need to be confident that the policymakers are going to make decisions within those parameters, because if you stop making decisions in a scientific parameter, which is what we have seen more recently, then you beg the question of whether the science is actually being valued. So we do need to value the science, and I would like to see that be challenged more vociferously by other scientific colleagues within and without Kamlar, to make sure that we keep the science straight. Thank you.
Dr. Granite, please.
Thank you. This is, of course, a very, very important question that we see not only in Kamlar, but in other areas as well. And in, so to speak, in our part of the world here, we see this a similar issue. And I think it's also related to the type of questions that are asked of our scientists. For example, the marine protected area. So that's a management tool that is that you can choose to use as a management tool. There are a whole host of other management tools in the toolbox within Kamlar and within the broader ETS as a whole. They all have different, they're adding value in different parts of managing the ecosystem. So the question is, I guess, a little bit to the commission, to the commissioners also. I mean, what questions do we ask to our scientists, or are we asking them a management question? Then it can become political. Or are we asking them a scientific question? I mean, how does this system work? What's here? And how are these interrelationships between different species? And I mean, this type of scientific questions. What's the impact of climate change on fish stocks? Or how is ice going to change and so forth? These are scientific questions that I think maybe one could be very stringent in providing them. And as I said, we see the same type of problem in other parts of the world. So this might be one way of addressing this. And then, of course, what Jane says is so important. It is to open up the work of the Commission much more. I mean, there shouldn't be any reason why these scientific discussions shouldn't be open and transparent. and debated. So I think these are two things that are possible for the members of the Commission to address, to improve, and get out of that problem that we hear a lot, that the science is becoming politicized. Then there are, I think, ways to move out of that situation. Thanks.
So thank you very much. We have gone over time a fair amount, and so I think we're going to need to come to a conclusion here. Since we do have the chair of the commission, I wanted to give you one last chance, if you would like, to speak about the commission and its future work. If you'd like to take another minute or 30 seconds. Would you like to do that?
Yes, from the perspective that it is really an honor to have to be engaged in this, and to get to learn about tremendous opportunities and challenges that we have in this region. And also, as I started off my intervention, to learn that we can collectively, over now 40 years in Kamlar and beyond that, in 70 plus years in the Antarctic Treaty, really address some of our most pressing concerns and find solutions and moving forward. So to be able to support that process as the chair of this organization, and also having now opened up an opportunity for dialogue, improved dialogue on the topic of spatial management and MPAs, as was agreed in the meeting last time, addressing issues of science and so forth, and the working methods of the organization is very, very good. And I think we should be a bit proud of what has been achieved, and try to tackle these differences, as we have talked about now, many opportunities. And I'm very pleased to have that opportunity to work for another year with these tremendous colleagues. Thanks.
So thank you all very much indeed. I hope the audience appreciates that these are some of the truly great experts and most experienced people involved in Kamlar at the moment. And so I think we've had a very interesting discussion today. And I want to thank all of the speakers for giving us their time, and look forward to further programs from the Wilson Center on Antarctic issues, which we'll continue to do in the future. So thank you all, and take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.